Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have two very special guests back on for our third roundtable. So the last one was episode 414. And then I was looking, I couldn't remember the first one. It actually was last August already, episode 330. So if you guys want to check those out, make sure you do. But Brian and Jordan, appreciate you guys hopping on. And these are always fun and we always get good questions. So looking forward to chatting with you guys again today.
Yep.
Pleasure, man.
Thanks for having me. Always a good time.
So first, I want to start off, Jordan, I want to start off with you because last time we chatted, you did not have your baby girl yet. And so now you do. So I wanted to see how that was going, but then also maybe ask you a few questions on what your training's looking like around that and everything like that now. So yeah, man, hand it over to you. Congrats, by the way, too.
Thank you. Thank you. She might pop in at some point and just photobomb the episode. We'll see. Yeah. I want to get you some good spiked views. Things are good. We were just briefly talking before that it's an adjustment, like lifestyle wise, but it's been whatever, man. It's incredible. It's a cliche, best thing ever. I feel like in one hand, I've been doing less work than ever before. But if I really think about it objectively, we were just Googling it. Like it's 100% like a Parkinson's law moment where like my work has now shrunk down to the time I have. And I feel like I'm getting the same amount done, actually. Maybe suboptimal sleep, but I'm not complaining about it. And maybe a little less time for some of the fringe educate instead of browsing examine.com, like 8 different like research reviews in my free time. Like maybe I'm doing that a little bit less, but all in all, it's been an incredible experience. And training wise, I won't take too long, but this is a little survivorship. This is like a little bit, I don't know how this comes off, but my baby girl is 8 weeks old and I'm not even sure if I've taken a day off. Like I've taken a few days off, let's be real. But what that sounds like, either I'm super disordered, violently afraid of taking time off. But the truth is, I've just really adapted what I'm doing. Like I'm doing, let's say 7 workouts a week, but like none of them take more than 30 minutes. My expectation of what I'm trying to do in each workout has gone down. My lifts are shorter. My runs are shorter. I cut out some of the longer stuff. I went from doing more like half marathon distance stuff, which requires the occasional longer workout, to, hey, let's train for the mile, where I need more speed work. Again, not entirely only speed work, but I'm probably not in need of ever doing 90-minute workouts for that. Listen, I wake up every day thinking like, can I get this workout done? And I think, yeah, I can. I lower my expectation. Maybe I lower my volume. Maybe I lower my intensity, maybe, but I feel best when I do something. And so it's certainly coming from a place of this is going to make me feel really good. And I'll tell you, today I had a plan to do whatever, like one of my harder workouts. And I just filmed like 8,000 form videos, thus like sweating in the garage. Now I'm in this overly sexy tank top here. But so I'm just skipping that workout today. And so just feeling, I don't know, just want to maybe throw that out there to people, that if you can modify your expectations, what a workout has to be, maybe how ambitious you are in terms of results, like you can still do something. And if you go at it from this is good for my mental health and I can be more efficient, maybe minimum effective dose this, like I can still do a lot. You don't necessarily need to do as much as I'm doing, but it's coming from a place of this is what keeps me in a good place mentally.
Yeah. So just like you said, changing it from trying to build as much muscle as possible to just, like you said, feeling good, helps you feel better and everything like that. I'm curious on the sleep side of things. Have you noticed like that? Has it impacted anything? You said you obviously haven't been sleeping the greatest, which we expect there, but yeah, curious to hear a little bit more about that.
In a binary sense, has it affected anything? Definitely. Has it affected a ton? I can't say, like to a point where I would uncomplain about it. I would. She sleeps okay and better lately. Jenna and I have a really good routine, good from like a teamwork perspective. The expectations of one another during the overnight shift is like pretty dialed in. And I think there's a genetic component here where I actually think I do quite well on less sleep. I think if there's just like a genetic variance of like how much sleep people need, I think I do fine with 5 hours of sleep, maybe not forever on many consecutive days, but I tend to feel like at the end of a day where I've had 5 hours sleep the night before, I'm like, I feel like I was fairly productive. Don't feel like I just was falling asleep all day or anything like that. So it feels like, I don't know, that's always been something I've thought about myself, where I'm like, yeah, sleep's really important for me for sure, but I tend to feel okay on some lower sleep, which I think is coming in handy here.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like I can maybe get away with a little less, but it's one of those things, I don't know if it's like this for you, where it's like, I feel like I can do that. And Brian, like sometimes when I check in with you, I'm like feeling good, not getting a lot of sleep. And then all of a sudden, boom, I just feel like it hits me like 1 or 2 days and it catches up to me there. If that one interesting thing though, I'm assuming you take creatine. And again, this isn't going to be, I don't want, like, before I say this isn't going to supplement, but I had Greg Potter on the podcast probably about a year ago now. And he was telling me there is some potential research showing that like when you take creatine, it like you can get away with potentially a little, like it can offset some of the negative side effects of less sleep. So again, we need to make sure we get good sleep and you need to prioritize it. He mentioned that, hey, like that this period of time when you have a newborn, like you could potentially use it for that. And then I think I saw something on Examine a couple months ago too, where it was the same thing, showing that like from a cognitive function, when people had poor sleep, like they were able to maintain that a little bit better with creatine. So interesting there. I'm assuming you take creatine. Yeah. Cool. And then, yeah, training wise, man. So just going in there, feeling good and everything like that. Do you think if you had a gym that wasn't at home, do you think that would be a little bit more challenging for you, or like
1,000,000%? Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think in some ways it would be almost a non-starter. Like it would be really tough. I think if you're looking at it more optimistically, it would be nice to get that complete segregation sometimes. Like just this morning, Jenna was doing her workout and I'm on baby duty, like rocking and holding and bouncing and burping. But after 20 minutes of her workout, like Emerson was like, we had to stop the workout, went inside, like feed, come back to the gym. And that's both a blessing of like, we're able to do that. But there's also, if she had just gone to the gym, there's a nice moment of segregating and just getting your own space and your own time, and you're not on call. But that's the more optimistic view. I think having a home gym is just an incredible caveat here of like why this is able to happen. I also really think not being ambitious with my goals right now. I do 90 minutes of lifting a week, and training for the mile has allowed me to max 36 minutes for like my longest run workouts. And so, yeah, more of an adjustment in expectation that's been helpful.
Yeah. And Brian, I know you told me when I told you that we were expecting that, you're like, hey, you just adapt, right? Like you just figure it out and you adapt to it and you adapt your schedule. And it sounds like that's what you're doing right now, Jordan. Yep. So that's awesome, man. Again, congrats on it. That's super cool. And Brian, man, what about you? How's everything going on your end?
Yeah, everything's good. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I'm through that. I'm through that stage and not envious of it. Yeah, with me, everything's good. I'm in the heart of bike season at the moment. And so I've been really prioritizing biking a lot. One thing I've found that your listeners may find interesting is that, so last year I was under this belief that the more cardio you do, the better results you get, that there's this much higher correlation between dose and response than there is with lifting. Even though it does seem like with lifting, volume is important there as well. I think it's more important for cardio. And so I didn't want to take a lot of days off. What I would do is do more zone 2 or like zone 1 type efforts as a way to just keep my volume really high and still have 1 or 2 high intensity sessions a week. And this year, the last 4 or 5 weeks, I've been forced through social plans and other things to basically take a minimum of 2 days in a row off, sometimes 3. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or just Saturday, Sunday, where I can't bike. I might be able to fit a quick lift in, but I just can't bike on those days. I don't have the time for it. And every single week, I've been coming back on Monday after those 2 or 3 days off, and my performance has been so much better than I would have expected it to be. And so I'm starting to become a believer in this recovery thing and thinking that maybe there's even something to having these chunk days together of recovery instead of it just being like, I'm taking 2 recovery days on Wednesday and Sunday. It's no, maybe like Saturday and Sunday together seems to be uniquely beneficial for me, at least. So that's been cool. I've been already so right now my body weight is 198 pounds. I've managed to not only keep my weight the same from pre-bike season, but I've gained 4 pounds. And the secret, if anyone is wondering, is chocolate covered almond. That is the secret. But just tongue in cheek, I am 198 pounds. And despite being that weight at the moment, I'm setting some PRs from my peak of last season as far as like climbing different hills in the area or different segments on Strava or whatever. I'm doing better now at 198 pounds than I was doing at 180 pounds at the end of bike season last year. So feeling really good about that. Lifting's been good too, probably because I haven't lost any weight, but I feel super strong in the gym. I'm even right around all my PRs on everything. Training 2 to 3 times a week. I do 2 upper body days for every 1 lower body day. And then the one big change I've made this year to lower body training is I'm doing everything in the strength rep range. So I'm not doing any hypertrophy or endurance work for my legs, figuring that they're getting sufficient amount of that through the biking. And so everything I'm doing for legs is 5 reps or less. And that has been really cool too. Like my legs aren't really getting super sore. They're not getting fatigued in the same way they were last year. And I think all of that has played into this milieu of me feeling great and my performance being good.
Yeah, I guess the body weight's a big one. It sounds like just maybe focusing on eating a little bit more overall too this time around and making sure you're not seeing that body weight trend down.
Yeah, really, it's the chocolate covered almonds. I just can't force feed myself enough food. So I'm making sure I get enough protein. And then at the end of the night, when I'm still hungry, it's like I pull out half a pound of chocolate covered almonds and just do work. And that's been able to be successful in keeping my weight and my energy balance where I need it to be.
Yeah, I'm sure that's making a big difference in your performance. I'm curious on this 2 days off, because I actually had somebody reach out on one of my questions and say, and this was, I'm pretty sure they were talking more hypertrophy oriented when they asked this. I mean, I don't know if you're speaking specifically on like cardio training, but taking those 2 days off in a row, because I know when you and I started working together, it was you were saying, hey, I like having those days broken up, because then it's your performance. If you train 4 or 5 days in a row, what kind of happens on those like days 4 and 5 and stuff like that? Obviously you can work on the programming to get around that, but I'm just curious if there's anything, if you think that would, if you're talking still like hypertrophy strength related, or if that's just cardio, or if it's both, or yeah.
I was referring specifically to cardio. However, it may be applicable to lifting. The way I would look at it, though, would be that's a small rock, whether you're splitting it up between Wednesday and Sunday off or Saturday and Sunday. It's, hey, are you hitting your protein targets and your calories? And then it's worrying about your carbs and your fat grams and things like that. So does it make a difference? Maybe. Is it probably more dependent on the individual and what they prefer, whether they like carbs or they like fat and how they want to split those up? That would be my interpretation of it.
But yeah, that was what I was thinking, was like, really, it's like individual, like what, if that allows you to get more productive training, then obviously that's a good thing. But if you like doing it the other way, again, it just comes down to preference. But I think he was asking if there was like any special benefit to 2 days off in a row versus.
Yeah, I'm sure you get extra recovery if you put an important training session after the 2 days of recovery. For me, I always make Monday my hardest or longest. It's either like a hard interval hill climb thing, or it's like a really long zone 2, a 2.5 hour zone 2 ride or something like that. So I'll put something really hard on Mondays. And just as of my N of 1 experience, is that my performance on those Mondays is higher than I would have expected it to be if I hadn't maybe taken those 2 days off. So I think maybe this person should just experiment N of 1 style and do 4 weeks in a row where they take 2 days in a row off, and then do 4 weeks in a row where you split it up and see which one you feel better on.
Yep. Yeah. Just see. Jordan, what about you? Do you have any kind of thoughts on that, or what you prefer there, or anything?
Yeah, I think the idea of consolidating stressors with the goal of almost consolidating the recovery. So not consolidating, but what are you solving for? Let's say if somebody trains 7 days a week, essentially, is a heuristic way of thinking about this. If someone trains 7 days a week, how many rest days should we create? How many 2-a-days should we create? And where should we put those rest days to optimize recovery? Is this somebody who does 6 days of training with 1 2-a-day and 1 rest day recover better than a person who does 5 days of training with 2 2-a-days and 2 consecutive rest days? What about that same person with a Wednesday, Sunday off? I doubt it matters more. I doubt the physiology outweighs the perception and the preference, for sure. I have not found I agree with Bryan, where on that, like early on in the week, you'll perform better coming off of 2 back-to-back days. I think I would have a limit for, and I know Bryan's not saying this, but I know, let's say we take 2 consecutive days of recovery, let's say rest days, and we say that's a thing that's a non-negotiable for me. For me, at some point, it wouldn't be a non-negotiable. I would rather have no rest days than do 5 2-a-days. Of course, that's an extreme example, but I feel like I'm at the point where, let's say I'm doing 7 workouts right now. I really don't really like having more than 1 rest day right now, because if I want to solve for having more than 1 rest day and putting them together, I'd have to have multiple 2-a-days, which to me, from a lifestyle and preference, is not something I'd like to do. But I think, yeah, if someone's okay, but screw all that preference stuff, like physiologically, is there maybe a unique benefit to consecutive rest days? Maybe. I don't know how you would really parse that out outside of people just performing better on a Monday, Tuesday, which you would, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think that, I don't know why I lost my train of thought. Go ahead.
I love it.
Dude, this was an infant brain. Like, chill. Like, come on, dude.
Man, I thought you were going to drop some knowledge on there.
I had a great thing. I feel like it's all going to come back around.
We'll pretend like you said something super duper smart.
I know what it is. So if you do take those 2 rest days in a row and you perform better in the beginning of the week, it's likely that you're sacrificing performance later in the week because you don't have the midweek rest day in there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of,
if you're like, that's like when people, Bryan, or people who message you in Paragon, they're like, hey, Bryan, I'm going away Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Can I do all 4 days and then take 3 days off? It's like, yeah, if I take the person who does Monday, Tuesday off, Thursday, Friday off, and I pit them against someone who does Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you extrapolate over 10 years. Again, I don't like doing over 10 years, it doesn't matter, but like it does fall in that bucket. So I would go with what's best for my lifestyle. What gives me the greatest perception of like better SFR? How do I do the most hard work with it feeling the easiest? And for some people, that might be like, let me crush myself 5 days in a row and have those 2 consecutive days off. That creates a lower net amount of stress and fatigue for me, perceived wise, which I would never tell somebody to not do that, and vice versa. Someone's like, hey, Wednesday really breaks things up for me. I get some stuff done. I need that day because the workout after that is legs again, and whatever. Like whatever argument you'd make, I'm signing off on that.
Yeah, I guess with hypertrophy, it's like you don't have easy days per se. And so with cardio, if you're doing 5 in a row, it's easy to be like, I do an intensity day, I do a 2 zone 2 days, and then another intensity day and a zone 2 day.
Yeah,
and
true.
Boom, that's pretty easy. You can do 5 in a row. For lifting, it's just a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, you're pretty much having to, you can't, have those lighter days and whatnot. But again, I'm assuming probably smart programming, good programming probably makes a lot of this not as big of an issue either, right? You could obviously program in a way that make sure you protect that performance across the board there on that. But yeah, I figured there probably wasn't anything to those 2 days in a row. But then as you were saying that, Bryan, I was like, maybe he has some different thoughts on that. So cool. So real quick, Jordan, I actually want to come back to you on what's going on with you again, real quick before we dive into these questions. And Bryan, I did get, once you had your DEXA scan post, people were like, you gotta have Bryan talk about this. So we're definitely going to hit on that after this. But real quick, Jordan, for you, any tips for sleep and managing that? Again, understanding that, hey, obviously during this period of time, it's not going to be great, but is there anything for you that's worked, you think maybe has helped you out a little bit from that perspective?
Yeah, I'll start by saying, and Bryan will know this and you will learn this, is that like whenever you talk about parenting, there's just like people come out of the woodwork with different experiences and different ways of things doing stuff. And if you say something that's worked for you, people tell you it's wrong. And it's actually like been a wild experience. So massive caveat of everything comes out of my mouth is like purely just what's working for us or not working. And that's it. Number one is we are like mega regimented. We have a good friend of ours that just had a baby in the same week, and they're like out to dinner, like taking the baby out to dinner, like working late some nights, and then waking up at different hours. And whether or not that's like beneficial for, like we're talking about getting the baby on a consistent schedule, makes them sleep better. I don't know that to be true, but having all three of us, me, Jenna, Emerson, on the same schedule every single night seems to, at the very least, create a less stressful environment, a little bit less moving parts, so expectation of what's going to happen from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. is, I can tell you right now what every day looks like. Not everybody lives their life that way, but that is like mega helpful. It's 5 o'clock dinner. Like then I clean up, tidy up, then we go for a walk, then it's bath time, then it's feed time, then it's both of us shower alternating and in bed at 9, baby's asleep by 10, whatever. Like it's been so 8 weeks straight of the exact same nighttime routine. I can't help but feel biased. That is what is really helped us a lot. The second thing, I don't want to get on a high horse about parenting, but being a team with your significant other and speaking explicitly about what the expectations of one another has been super helpful. Your baby's going to wake up in the middle of the night, and I think there's a lot of decision fatigue of who's going to do what when the baby cries at this time, and who's going to do it then. And should I go? Should you go? Should you change them? I change them. Talk about that shit beforehand. Jenna and I know, like we alternate nights putting her to bed. And then if she wakes up in the middle of the night, change, feed, swaddle, feed, bed. Like just talk about that shit beforehand. To me, what's more exhausting is not knowing who's doing what and having to have that talk every time something needs to get done. Let's talk about that. At 8 o'clock in the morning, when she finally wakes up, when everyone wakes up, I go upstairs. From 8 to 9, I hold the baby, change, play, burp, so Jenna can shower, so Jenna can brush her teeth, so Jenna can. My last high horse parenting moment is communicate with your spouse, divide up the roles in certain times at overnight and before bed and when you wake up. Just have that shit ironed out. It's not always, by the way, it's totally not the same every night, but like just have that already decided. So you don't have to like every single time something happens, you're like, should I do that or should you do that? It's like that shit is exhausting.
Yeah, have that routine and obviously, or try to get that routine and then obviously communicate ahead of time there. Cool. Anything nutrition wise that has been helpful or anything there that you've been trying to stick to?
Definitely not being in a deficit. And for me, like I double down on what's hysterical is, we don't even do that. But finishing food earlier, like I'm just not somebody, I don't sleep well when I have a full stomach. So this isn't like a spike insulin before you go to bed or some BS. But like it's not even like I'm trying to intermittent fast. It's not at all what I'm doing. But if I like to have all my food done by 6:30 and then in bed by 9:30, 10, at least 3 hours to fully digest. And so that nutrition wise, that's been the most helpful. Is I really just don't sleep. I don't know how people like fall asleep with like pretzel crumbs on them I just don't I can't eat and then I could. I'm saying I just sleep better when I feel fully digested, we'll say.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to that too. That's something that like the kind of don't eat carbs late at night thing. Obviously, we know that like overall that's a myth, but I do think there's definitely something to that for sure. And having these massive meals before bed, because anytime I do have that, like I notice a big difference in sleep. And I'm the same way. I try to get done as early as I can there. So cool, man. Super helpful stuff, and I love hearing about this. So Bryan, let's talk about your DEXA, man. Yeah, I know you got that. I saw your post, and then like people were super interested in it, and I think this will be a good topic for us to just chat about in general in terms of the DEXA and these body comp measurements and stuff like that. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I guess the backstory for anyone that hasn't seen the post or whatever is that this is my third DEXA. I did one in August or September of 22, and then I did my one-arm training experiment, and I wanted to get one 6 months later so that I could get some level of confidence in whether my one-arm training experiment worked or not. Got that second one 6 months later, and it was really damn close to the first one. Like, it built my confidence in the DEXA. It said I had gained an eighth of a pound, not an eighth of a pound, 0.8 pound of muscle in that period of time. My arm measurements were close enough that everything seemed to line up similarly to the last time. I waited a year, and then I went to get this third DEXA. And going into it, I mostly expected the same. I was like, I look at myself every day in the mirror. I still look the same. I still have the same strength numbers in hypertrophy rep ranges in the gym. I still have abs. I still have veins in my arms. I weigh the same. Like, I really didn't expect any changes at all. So then my DEXA results come through a week later, and they have me at almost 6% higher body fat, which means when you're talking about an almost 200-pound human, 6% is about 12 pounds. So I essentially gained about 12 pounds of fat and lost about 12 pounds of muscle, according to the DEXA. And I didn't believe it. As soon as I saw the number, I was like, oh, something's super fucked up here. Because it wasn't like, it's such a big number. 12 pounds of muscle or 12 pounds of fat on a body is something that you notice. It's not just something where you're like, oh, I look the same. I see myself every day. I'm still the same. I take pictures. I have comparisons, whatever. I feel like if it would have told me that I lost 1, 2, maybe 3 pounds of muscle, I would have been apt to believe it, just because I've been doing so much cardio and it's been a priority. I've been lifting less, whatever, a number of reasons. But when it comes back with 12, I think the most disappointing thing for me was just that now I don't feel like I can believe it, that I don't have a reliable source of body comp. And I think it was a bit naive of me to think that it was reliable, maybe, but I was jaded because of the first 2 measurements being so close. Regardless, it is what it is. I'm going to write them. I haven't done it yet. I've just been gathering my thoughts on how I want to phrase it and stuff like that. So that's the basis of it. And then I can let you jump in, but I have some information as far as the machinery and some of the technical side of things that the audience may be interested in as well.
Yeah, real quick. My understanding is the DEXAs, while they're the gold standard, they're a lot better at group averages. And that's typically what they'll use like in the research is they're good at like group averages, but from an individual standpoint, they're not as good. And from my understanding, Grant Tinsley, I had him on the podcast, and I think he'll do like DEXA, but I think he also does some like other measurements to put them all together to really get a more accurate picture. But I'm wondering if you're in your specific example, because from my understanding of it, it is like your lean body mass is dependent on like glycogen storage. So did you have a massive workout or anything the days prior or anything like that?
So I made sure to emulate the exact same conditions going into the DEXA every single time. And what I did each of the 3 times, because I had my DEXA at 11 a.m., is I would do a workout in the morning. I would have my whey and Gatorade shake along with my workout, and then I wouldn't eat or drink anything else until after the DEXA was over. So it was workout plus protein drink, same thing each time, same time of day for the DEXA. I don't think you can emulate it any better than that. And I do agree with you. If I had a ton of water and food one of the times and been fasted another one of the times, or worked out one of the times and not the other times, I could see where that would impact it for sure, because it is only a 3-compartment model. But given that I emulated the same conditions, I would have expected less variance there.
I figured you didn't just, hey, I'm going to do it at 12 p.m. one day, 8 a.m. the one day. I figured you probably had those things in, but I was just curious to see if that was off a little bit. Jordan, did you have any thoughts on that or anything?
I mean, thoughts on generally the doing DEXAs. This is my fear of doing DEXAs, but Bryan's, I know he's used them in the past. And also is completely the person who would not necessarily allow the results to massively skew the direction of what you're doing. You're the person who knows way more about other proxies of am I doing something right than to be thrown off by this and be like, oh, I must be messing everything up. In this scenario where you do a DEXA, like that information isn't necessarily, you do it more for fun and you just look at it as, hey, this is an interesting thing more than, oh, this is the single deciding factor that tells me if I'm doing things appropriately or not. It is the reason that I'm just like averse, I think, a little bit, but I also just haven't done them in the past and thus you've had a good experience doing them and thus predicting that you'd have another, again, reasonable experience to derive some reasonable results from, but this wasn't that time, it seems.
Yeah. One of the things, actually, I just talked about this on my podcast, but you guys can hear about it now for the first time. Greg Nuckols saw my post and he DM'd me and wrote me like 3 paragraphs of information, which was really fucking cool. Greg Nuckols move.
Greg.
But he explained to me a number of different things about DEXAs in general. And then specifically, he had read a comment that I posted where I put the specific model of DEXA that I was using and how it was. So a guy asked me, a scientist commented on my thing, asked me what DEXA it was. I copied and pasted it. It's a Hologics machine. And it was with the NHANES calibration. So Greg Nuckols wrote, he goes, hey, and I saw this comment where you wrote that this Hologics machine was NHANES. And he goes, so the Hologics machines were just changed from the classic calibration to the NHANES calibration. And what the models are showing is that there's about a 5% increase in body fat going to the NHANES calibration as compared to the classic. And so if you were to reverse engineer this, that 5% increase in body fat that would be a result of the calibration change explains the majority of the variation in my DEXA result. At some level, I feel vindicated there, but the thing that I struggle with is that I don't feel like I should be 21% body fat on any DEXA scan. What kind of calibration model are they using where I could be 21% on this model and 12% on a GE? Apparently GE is like way more friendly than Hologics. So you use a different DEXA machine that would put me at like 12% body fat, or we have this NHANES calibration that's 21%. And the fact that there can be that much variation to me is just the biggest letdown of all of it.
Yeah, that's crazy. So basically, so you're thinking that the reason it's high is because they made that calibration. But at the end of the day, it's like, why would it even be like, it shouldn't be that high anyways in general.
There shouldn't be a calibration that puts me at 21% body fat. What calibration is that? What are how are they calibrating that? The other thing that Greg Nuckols was saying is that DEXAs are notorious for misassessing people that are quite lean and have a lot of muscle. And another guy in the comments resonated the same thing and said that actually aren't calibrated to be accurate for anybody under 18% body fat, that they're more accurate for people over 18% body fat, which I don't know where the reference is for that, but Greg Nuckols did seem to echo similar sentiment without saying 18% specifically. And at the end of the day, the DEXA is meant to assess bone density. It's a tool for bone density that's been provided a secondary use for body fat analysis, but it's not its intended purpose.
So where do you guys fall now on this? Jordan, I don't know if that changes your views at all on it. Bryan, I'm sure it probably changed yours slightly. Would you guys recommend it to other people, or you guys sit out there with that?
I just have never had it be, again, Bryan is a unique experience. You would be a unique experience. Me doing it would be a unique experience. But I just don't think that the person, I don't know. Let's just say the people I speak to, the people I work with, I've never had it be a positive experience. Where it can be a neutral learning experience, but like a positive, I think bone density, by the way, awesome. Totally do it. Look at the bone density. It's mega accurate, relatively speaking, for bone density. Awesome. Do it. Bone density. Great. If Bryan found out that he was like 12% body, like there was outside of just education and it being potentially fun, I don't really see a big use for it. I've had 90% of the time you fall into the camp of one of 3 camps where you find out that the percent is lower than you thought it would be. And then you're frustrated you don't look better because you're like, damn, I'm fucking 13%. I thought I'd look better. Or it says you're 23 and you're Bryan. You're like, I'm not 23. And you're like, or Bryan obviously knows that's wrong, but somebody could be like, oh, I think I'm 18 and it says 23. And you're like, oh shit, I'm fat now. Or it says 18, you thought you were 18. You're like, okay, I already knew. But again, I don't think education for education's sake and experience is inherently a bad thing if you can keep it in that context. I'm down with it there. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel down on DEXAs in general. I think for body fat assessments specifically, I probably will not recommend them. And it's unlikely I'll do another one myself. Although I am curious if I do find a DEXA scan that's a GE model, I might just have to do it just to see if it has me at an absurdly low body fat percentage in comparison, just as a kind of N of 1 experiment. But that would be at this point the only time I would see myself doing one again in the future anytime soon.
Do you guys have anything that you would recommend people do? I personally I just monitor this and we're going off measurements, progress pictures. Some people want those exact numbers, but do you guys have anything that you would use to potentially find this or anything?
No, I'm with you. I've switched actually to not switch. I'm do exactly what you do. I've thrown waist to hip ratio in the mix with that, just from its correlation in terms of just honestly, it's more of a population level thing. Even that on an individual level doesn't tell us a whole lot because bone structure can really throw that for a loop. But yeah, not something I use. I'd rather look at how you look and feel about things, plus what's going on under the hood blood work wise, and we call it a day.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Measurements, pictures, scale weight, the way you feel. And then I guess I have calipers at home and I have decent amount of experience using calipers. And I would do them on my wife for once a year for a number of years, just so we get base measurements of things. And if it's the same person doing it, I feel relatively confident that the way you pinch and stuff is going to be relatively consistent. So I don't expect it to pick up minute changes in things, but I do think without trying to correlate what the skin folds mean to a body fat percentage, I think there's value in knowing the skin folds themselves and being you were 23 millimeters and now you're 18 millimeters or something along those lines.
Did you do MNU, Jeff?
I did not.
I don't know why it's popping in my head, but actually early days MNU, part of that was the discussion of fat calipers, and that's actually the recommendation that they give, Brian, is don't do the conversion. Just take the fat caliper numbers as what they are and use that as from a directional sense for what's happening, not necessarily worrying so much about the conversion over to body fat percentage. So that rings true. I'm with that.
It's always interesting too. People just get really caught up in these body fat percentages, right? I don't know, when I get on a call with I feel generally it's men. I feel women don't worry as much about it, but men's always, oh, I got to be 10% body. It's they get so fixated on these particular numbers. And I feel it just leads them astray when that happens. And it's just it's also super, I don't know. I just find it also depends. I feel 10% body fat's going to look different on one person than another person. So again, it's just what are this again goes back to what we talked about, how you feel, how are you looking? Cause that's again, ultimately what people want. It's, do you really care if you're 10% or 12% if you look better at 12%, right? Just getting caught up in these numbers. And I feel getting these things leads to that. But again, Brian, we know you obviously did it for other reasons there with that. So cool. Anything else on these DEXA scans, body comp stuff, or anything that you guys want to hit on? Cool. Nope. All right. I want to go over two studies too. I think this will be right up our alley here. A couple new ones here. First one's kind of the leg extension. So the effect of the hip flexion angle on it. So leaning back more, they showed they had a little bit more hypertrophy. I just wanted to get your guys' quick thoughts on it. Does it change your mind on anything here with this? Is this something you guys have implemented? And I didn't know if there was anything that you found in this study that was useful, that you, or maybe any insights that you guys had in particular. Either one of you can.
Jordan.
Yeah, Jordan.
I think it's not. I think it all checks out. And sometimes my first thought was nice when what you expect to happen happens. Basically, going into more hip extension, we can train the leaning back more in the leg extension. Pre-stretches the rec fem, meaning that when you end up doing the knee extension part, you're training the rec fem in a more lengthened position, which we are thinking, oh yeah, it's probably going to lead to more growth. And it did. And then all the other quads shouldn't really be affected because they don't really get affected by hip angle. And they really didn't. And so it was a good moment of we're not dumb. This makes sense. I'm happy that it worked out in the way it should. And does it change anything? Yes, I think it does, in the sense that it changes it in this way for me. I think that it's meaningful. I don't know if it's absolutely meaningful, but I think here's how I think about the leg extension in particular right now. Is if you can lean back in the leg extension without sacrificing, and Cass made a really good post, there's two things. If you can lean back in the leg extension without it coming at the cost of how much knee flexion you get to start the move, and it doesn't come at the cost of stability, then do it. I think that the latter part is a bigger issue from me trying it out a few times, is depending on the machine, the angle of the backrest, the person, how long the seat is. Sometimes you trying to scoot your butt forward so you can lean back more puts you in a position where, okay, cool, we're more lengthened. But I'm watching people do the set and they're freaking all over the place now. And maybe they're having a little bit more trouble holding themselves down. So if it doesn't come at the cost of stability, and you're I could do it leaned back really well, or I could do it leaned forward really well. Lean back, absolutely. Same benefit for the other quads, a little bit more, 50 to 170%, obviously sounds super great. But if it's a benefit for no cost, that's what I'm saying. If there's no cost of stability, then I would do it. If, of course, there's a point where, okay, maybe I lost a tiny bit of stability, but I gained a tiny bit from the lengthening, okay, maybe there's a net neutral there. But I tend to lean in the direction of, hey, and I gave this, the reason I'm feeling this way is I gave this kind of speech to my group when this came out. Everyone's like, hey, should we start leaning back in our leg extension? I was like, lean back in your leg extension. If you feel super stable doing it, you can push super close to failure without the leaning back, throwing a spanner in the works where now you're like, you don't really know, whatever, just you're uncomfortable, you're a little bit less stable, and you can't actually really push yourself as close to failure because something about that has now made it awkward. As long as that's not happening, you should totally do it. It costs you no, if it costs you no extra anything, then it's just a plus. And so I would recommend doing it. I'm not so think it's a game changer or something like that. But whenever we have a no cost, all benefit option, like I'm down with that. Unfortunately, it was untrained people, but I don't think that changes the potential for a similar relative benefit. It certainly changes the absolute difference of somebody way more jacked will see less total muscle growth for anything they do. But I still look at the relative and I think, okay, a newbie is going to get, it was in relation to the other quads, or it was in relation to the other method of doing it without leaning back. And yeah, I feel like if you can lean back and it stay stable, still work close to failure, and it doesn't cost you the knee flexion component, then do it.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I like that you added the stability aspect of it, because I do feel like with a lot of this long muscle length training stuff, I feel like a lot of the research, maybe this wasn't what was intended right away, but it was like, oh, hey, the longer you can lengthen the muscle, the better. But like you said, we also need to look at like stability, and you can't overdo it if it takes away from that aspect.
Yeah,
so,
Bryan and I, so people are like, Bryan and I worked at, when we went to N1 at the hypertrophy camp, and Kaz like friggin' like Jimmy rigged his leg extension to have this like beautiful leaned back rest that fit perfectly. Yeah, if you got that, do it. Bryan, we both have the leg extension, the X Mark one. I'm not sure I love it so much lean back, frankly. What I definitely won't do is lean forward now. I think that was a position I was finding myself very comfortable in, but I'm like, all right, how far can I lean back and still not feel awkward is how I'll go into this. But I think it depends on the machine and the person, whether or not that might happen.
Yeah, I feel like the leg extension machines like we have, or any of them with a fixed vertical backrest, when you try to lean back in those, you inevitably have to shift your hips forward, and that sort of pushes the knees forward. And now your knees are not in line with the rotation of the cam. And I think that not only does that decrease stability a little bit, but it puts your knees in a compromised position to be moving heavy loads. I think the study validated everything that I would believe that it should. It was exactly what you would want it to be and show it's in line with all of the other research, and it fits. I guess the best thing that I would expect to come out of it is that manufacturers are going to start designing leg extension machines now with backs that do exactly what Cass's did, where it goes back and it changes position, and maybe there's a cool headrest for it, and maybe like you even cut a small hole in the front where the legs hang over the pad, and your legs can actually move back a little further, so that as your hips shift forward, you can get more knee flexion out of it. They have the pad come back a little bit further. There's a number of different ways that you can mess with the design of these machines to accommodate what we're seeing in this study, and I think and hope that we will start to see these as well.
You could, in theory, put the backrest all the way back, not move your hips back, and shove a bunch of material now between your lower back and what is now a big space that's been created.
Yeah.
I tried to do that with like my ab mat and a foam block and a sweatshirt, and I ended up feeling like it was more fuss than it was worth. And that's a me decision I've come to for me. The other thing is, this is a win for people who have the leg extension at the end of their bench. I have a couple people in my home program that are like laying flat down on their bench, that like they're like rickety bench that has the leg extension. They're laying all the way back now. Maybe they have a pillow for their head just because it's quite a bit to be in, like, to go all of a sudden into like fully hip extended position. But they're like, should I do it like this? And I'm like, absolutely. This looks like they're holding the back of the bench with two hands and being able to do that. And I'm like, actually, it's a win for these benches.
Yeah, I used it in Costa Rica when I was there. They had one of those lying down ones, and I was like, we're going to try this. And yeah, it rips your quads up. It's the bottom position is the hardest position. So
that's funny. Those, I'm sure those like outside of that maybe haven't been the greatest, but now they have a little, now they can make them even better. They're better than the regular leg extensions now. Yeah. Hopefully, like you said, they do start to make some leg extensions that focus on this. I just feel like, unfortunately, the most like popular brands that you see at most gyms don't take the stuff into consideration, right? The more I learn about it, they really don't, right? Like, for example, like hammer strength and stuff like that. But I had to do when I went to the N1, I had to do the leg extension regular, or have that, how we had it set up like that. And we did the cast sets on that. And man, that was freaking brutal on there with that. So Cool. Yeah, no, I thought that was super interesting, but you guys bring up some really good points that I didn't think about, where like, obviously Brian, you mentioned the one where if you have it set up normally, now your knees are too far forward, and that can put some stress on your knees and might not be the best there. Again, it's in theory great, and we want to set it up this way, but it can be hard if you're depending on the machine as well too. But if you have the one that is off the bench, you're good to go there. Cool. Yep. Anything else on this study before I bring up the next one?
No.
Cool. So the other one, and again, this was actually, I'm pretty sure the same group, I think, right? I think it was Larson, and then I think Milo was on it too. Resistance training beyond momentary failure, the effects of lengthened supersets on muscle hypertrophy in the gastrocnemius. And so, Brian, I know we had been doing these for a while now, and I know this was just done in the calves. They didn't do it on other muscle groups, but another kind of cool thing here to show that potentially doing some lengthened partials at the end can be super helpful. I'll hand it over to you, and if there's anything that any insights from this one or anything like that.
Yeah, I love this study. And again, I'm not surprised by it. What I love about it is that it's the first study that actually uses partials after failure. And this was the first way that I began instituting lengthened work, so to speak, was taking back movements and just continuing to let range of motion drop off after failure. And this was like 2020 when the first leg curl study came out. I was like, oh, how would this apply to other muscle groups? And to me, that was the way that made the most sense. It's crazy that it took 4 years for them to actually do a study that did this. I'm slightly disappointed that it was in the calves, because I feel like the calves are the one muscle group that's been overstudied to the point that we know they respond to all of this lengthened stuff really well. And so I think it was no surprise. If I have a couple critiques of the study, I would say that the group that did the partials at the end did extra volume. The other group didn't do anything at the end. They just stopped. So there's extra volume, which is hard to account for. I wish that there would have been a group that did failure, and then maybe it was like a drop set, or maybe it was a drop and then short range of motion partials. Maybe it's an isometric static hold at the end to make up the total time that the other group was doing lengthened partials. I don't exactly know. I feel like there could have been a number of different arms of this to show comparisons with different approaches. But I think the fact that there is extra volume being done by the partial group in some ways is a pretty poor representation of this comparison.
Was this kind of too, I remember I had Milo on the podcast, and at the end we were talking about like length and partials and training muscles at longer lengths. And at the end, he calls you out. I think one way to misapply the research is by doing these sets. Is this, because he was like saying, he basically was saying that, hey, there was no research done on it. And now it's,
he was hating on me super hard at the end of your podcast. He was like, yeah, I don't want to call anyone out, but Bryan does these partials after failure, and these are not evidence-based or whatever. And I was like, yeah, they're fucking not evidence-based because I'm ahead of science. Damn it. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool to be vindicated in that sense.
Did you show him the study that he did on himself? Or was he even in the, yeah, I think maybe he was, right? Yeah, Milo's on it. Yeah. Did you show him this study and be like, see, I told you,
no, man. I'm sure he doesn't even remember. Like, yeah, I know. Legitimately, That dude's on so many podcasts and has his hands in so many baskets right now. But of course, I'm just holding this grudge about it that's been lasting for 2 years now. And I'm just waiting to.
Finally, here it is. Cool. Jordan, what about you, man? Any insights over you? Any surprises? Anything like that?
Yeah, I'm not up on a high horse soapbox here, but I'm gonna say what Bryan said, but more abruptly. What a complete missed opportunity to not even attempt to equate volume. Actually, I'll be honest with you. This does not prove anything about lengthened partials. This proves doing more volume causes more growth, and they happen to do that. Like if you had to compare to a group that did a full set to failure and then a bunch of short range of motion partials, I bet you that group gets better gains too. So this actually doesn't prove anything to me other than more volume caused more growth. It's like being like one group trained to 3 RIR and the other one trained to 0 RIR, and that group saw better growth. Yeah, I bet. It's super frustrating to me, frankly. Now I would believe that even if they were somewhat equated, the one that was even remotely more biased towards the position. Let's say you equate volume, but one group that volume was allocated to full ROM, the other group was allocated to some continued partials. I'm still betting in that direction of partials probably producing a better, more hypertrophy, but this didn't tell us that. It's just like mega frustrating. Like why didn't somebody think of this? They're all super smart. Like they're way smarter than me, and I don't claim to be like Mr. Lengthened position, but they're like, yep, like lengthened position. I'm like, no, more. You did more. Like the group that did more saw more growth. Like who spent this many months designing the study and not to nobody raised their hand? It was like, maybe someone's just going to think because we did more volume that we saw more growth. Like you could have had, like Bryan said, we could have had this comparison, right? And then we could have had another group that did just short partials at the top, and the other group, let's call it, I don't even love lengthened superset, by the way. It's not the terminology. I like extended set partials or something like that. But like you could have extended set partials in the short position, one group, and the other leg do the lengthened, and then one group do whatever. Like you could have had, just could have, I don't know, you could have done it in a way that actually proved a unique benefit to the partials, not a unique benefit to doing more work. Is not surprising to me at all. Almost like frustrated the hell out of me. Yeah, I just don't. And then I just look at the comments. If you scroll through the comments, it's like other really smart people. Like nobody's saying that. And then it's almost like only when you get down to like people who don't have their like, yeah, and here's my little tinfoil hat. It's like only when you get down to a point where people who aren't completely invested in lengthened position as an identity, do you see people bringing that up. Like for all the comments, but like that people are like, yeah, dope. It's you're also a really smart person. Like, why didn't you think of this? Maybe because you, whatever. I don't want to go tinfoil hat on this situation, but yeah, this was weird for me. This was a weird. I bet you that if it had been done appropriately, I think we'd still be sitting here and being like, yeah, lengthened partials post full round failure are one of many ways to extend a set and accumulate more volume per time and all that cool stuff. But this just didn't do that, frankly.
First of all, that's a good point you bring up. That's something that I overlooked. And again, I think that's always, and anytime I bring up these studies, I think it's always important to like it's, you could read the abstract, and I always heard that like in the past, right? Oh, you just read that. But as I have more knowledge around all this stuff, like you really do start to see how the specifics do matter in these studies, and you can overlook these things again. And that was definitely something that I didn't even think about either. I totally overlooked that aspect.
And I don't want to be, they note that, by the way, in the study, like they note at the end of the study, they said, as such, it's difficult to say whether the additional growth stems from the additional volume or the length in training. That's after the fact, though. I find it odd that wasn't part of the study design, whatever. Like, I'm sure there's a million more lengthened studies to come. We're going to clean this up. And it's just one study anyway. But yeah, this was an odd missed opportunity, I think.
For either of you guys, I know, Bryan, again, we've been doing these. I would imagine, again, it doesn't change anything on your perspective, but Jordan, do you program some of these lengthened partials in at the end and stuff like that? Does it change your mind on it or anything like that?
No, totally. Absolutely. Great idea. I think the most unique, for me, the biggest utility is like stimulus per minute. And so I think if we're already here and we're already in a set, we're already training hard. If I have a limited amount of time with the limited amount of sets we can do, intensity and pushing intensity beyond failure into partials goes in the bucket of things we can do to improve efficiency. And for muscle groups where it's difficult to acquire a good stimulus in the length position or kind of fail in the length of position, like all back work, basically. Yeah, super awesome. Between this and reverse drop sets with back work, love it. Really great. Definitely on board.
Yeah, it doesn't change anything for me. I echo everything Jordan said in critique of that study. I just didn't say it quite as he did. No, but I support all of that, and it doesn't change anything. Yeah, we continue doing all the same stuff. We still do some lengthened sets where relevant. We do some just lengthened range of motion. We do some that are full range of motion, and then partials after failure. There's a number of different ways you can slice that pie up and get benefits of the lengthened position across a variety of movements.
Yeah, and I agree on the calves too. It's, man, they really have hammered in on the calves. Like you said, it would be nice to get, because that is one of the, I feel like, critiques of like long muscle length training. So they just don't have it in all the muscle groups. I understand. I think some are just, part of it's just hard to measure in some of the muscle groups from my understanding. But like you said, it's like beat the dead horse here with the calves and stuff like that. And I also agree too, Jordan, that the lengthened superset, I don't like that terminology either. Again, it's just terminology. You got to name it something. But like you said, because when I first read the title of it, I was like, lengthened superset, is that like I'm thinking like a superset, right? Like you're supersetting it with something. But yeah, I like you said, lengthened partials or however
extended sets or whatever.
Yeah, I think that works a little bit better. So cool. Anything else on this study, guys, before we dive into the questions? Cool. All right. So first question is, don't feel the stretch in cable laterals. Any recommendations here on this?
I don't know if it totally matters. The lateral delt is a tough muscle to feel lengthen, but I think doing some kind of slow eccentric isometric hold at the lengthened position of the behind the back cable lateral, especially with single arm, because with the dual arm cable lateral, you never actually really get to the fully stretched position. But the way that you can angle your torso and really let that cable pull you from behind when you're doing the single arm variation, especially at wrist height where you're going to have a ton of tension back there. If you just slowly settle into that lengthened isometric as you go through the descent of the range of motion. When you get to the bottom, slow it down a little more and just inch your way into that lengthened position. Over time, you'll begin to feel the stretch. It's certainly not as profound as the stretch that you'll feel in other muscle groups, like at the bottom of a deep dumbbell fly or pec fly machine or something like that. But it's there. You just have to work your way into it over time.
Real quick on that, I wonder if, is it potentially, I guess the important thing would be that tension, right? Like you want to feel that tension at the bottom. That probably be, to you, would be a little bit more important than feeling like like a stretch essentially. And you may have just said that, but I'm assuming that's probably important.
Yeah, you want tension under load. You don't want it to be like a incline dumbbell curl where you can feel a stretch at the bottom if you keep your shoulder pressed in a certain way and you push your humerus back into the bench. You can feel a stretch at the bottom of the incline dumbbell curl, but if you look at physics, biomechanics, and you're literally just going against gravity and that dumbbell is just straight down and your arm is hanging straight, there's a slight stretch going on, but it's the stretch being pulled down, not being pulled back. And with you want tension under load. So in that case, you're getting a bit of stretch at your long muscle lengths, but you're not getting a ton of tension there. I think when you set up that cable at wrist height and it's pulling you from behind your body and you set your body in such a manner that your forearm is perpendicular to the cable when it's behind your back. So I don't know if you need to film that or just move your torso in a specific manner to get set up properly. But when you get that position where your forearm is perpendicular to the cable and it's behind your back and it's at wrist height, there's a stretch there, whether you feel it or not, it's happening.
That makes sense. I really like the single arm cable lateral raise too. I feel like that's solid too. So like you said, if you're doing the dual, maybe try that single arm. Jordan, what about you?
Oh, those are two things. I think make sure if someone's not feeling stretch, one of two thoughts are your cable's too low or you're doing it bilaterally without cuffs. So yeah, if you're doing it bilaterally with a D handle and you're at a gym and your D handle has like a long strap, yeah, your arm's probably not even getting back to your side before the knobs click and you get pissed off about it and you stop going back. So do it single arm, make sure the cable's at wrist height, and then like Bryan led with, which like I'm not so worried about. Like the word feel throws me off anyway, where I'm like, all of that makes me just want to see what it looks like. I'm not addressing the feels. I'm just, let's address what it looks like. Let's get you in a position that makes sense, challenges the length of position, gets into a stretch position. I'd rather check those boxes than worrying so much about what you're feeling.
And speaking of, you were talking about like the cuffs or like the D handles that they have. I used it at N1, but in Jordan, I'm pretty sure you have those. The handles that I think they're Bowflex ones, right? That's basically the D handle, but they have the strap on top. Have you found those to be pretty helpful there with that, like over cuffs and stuff like that?
I think gun to head, I have to do one set for my life. I still pick a cuff. But just like the absolute minor nuisance of getting the cuffs on, clipping on, and the handle's just a little bit easier. And so I love those Bowflex handles. It's like you have to buy them on the Bowflex website. They're way too expensive, like $30. But after using them at N1, I was like, I got to try these. And so I do use them. That's what I'm using for the behind the back lateral raise. But if I'm doing it bilaterally, I'm definitely cuffing. And again, a set for my life, I'm using cuffs as well.
I've actually been surprised at how much I'm using cuffs for lots of things these days. Like initially it was just lateral delts and tricep, and now I'm using them for like different chest movements and stuff too on the cables, as well as the lean back incline pullover thing. There's a ton of utility for them and I'm just a huge fan.
Yeah. I got those a couple months ago, and yeah, I freaking love using those, especially for the lateral raises too. Have been super helpful there with that. Cool, good stuff there on the cable laterals there. So next one, is the pump needed for muscle growth?
I think no is if you had to gun to head binary answer. It's certainly associated with types of things that you would do that also build muscle, but if you pursue more pump as an end, you will eventually divert from probably what's best for hypertrophy. So it's more, hey, if you do like pretty good hypertrophy training, you're going to get a pump. But if you make acquiring the largest pump possible your main goal, you probably divert from what's optimal. And then that would be like doing a lot of short position work gets you more pump, like doing higher rep ranges gets you more pump, potentially doing lower reps and a lot of metabolic intensity techniques, which I'm fine with. But if you combine all that stuff, it probably looks like a program that's a little less good for hypertrophy, if not a lot less good than the 6 to 10 rep range, more length of position, more compound, stuff like that. It's a weird way of phrasing it. I don't think, and the person phrasing it is probably, hey, I do my workouts, like I'm not getting a big pump. Should I be worried about that? I think that you could replace the word pump with soreness, and I feel pretty similarly about it. If someone's like, hey, I'm never getting a pump in my training, it's like people are like, you don't need to be sore to build muscle. I think you could also say you don't need to have a real crazy pump to build muscle. But if someone's telling me that they never ever get a pump, just like if somebody tells me they never ever even get the least bit sore, that does put my little detective hat on. And I'm like, maybe let's take a look at why that might be. Let's look at intensity, the amount of sets you're doing, which exercises you're doing, carbohydrate intake, hydration. So yeah, I think if someone's, I never get a pump, am I building muscle? It's if you're never even getting the slightest pump, then I want to talk about it for sure. But it's possible you're getting a little pump. Your expectation is that you should be getting a huge pump and you're actually doing just fine.
Yeah, I agree. I used to train almost exclusively until a month ago in the 5 to 10 rep range and more in like the 5 to 8 rep range. And I always would take 3+ minute rests between sets. And I almost never got a pump, like almost never got a pump. In the last month, Jeff, as you've seen in your training, I've also changed myself to that kind of 15, 12, 10, 8 approach on a lot of movements. And the pump that I'm getting is insane. I like finish the sets of 15 and 12 and I'm walking around like looking for a mirror because I'm like, this is insane. I haven't felt a pump like this since I was in college. And it's literally just changing from adding 7 reps to a set and going from 7 reps to 14 reps or whatever it is. So how about, have you noticed that too, Jeff? Are you getting more of a pump with those descending rep schemes?
Yeah, definitely. And I will say I need to pay attention to it a little bit more, but I do feel like I am getting more of a pump versus the, like you said, the 5 to 10 rep range, a little bit longer rest. So yeah, and I do feel like I need to pay attention to that a little bit more today and see if I'm noticing that a little bit more. I did, sorry, I know you didn't ask this, but I did ease into the training last week. So I did a little less overall.
Yeah.
So maybe that was part of it too, that I didn't notice it, but yeah. Sorry.
One of the things I really like about that 15, 12, 10, 8, and there's a lot of things that I don't like about it too. I've actually written posts about why I think that rep scheme has its drawback. But one of the things that I have enjoyed in using it is that the sets of 15 and 12, as silly as it sounds, I'm like focusing more on mind muscle connection.
Yeah.
And because the weights are lighter and because you're doing so many more reps, there's less of that just, I have to achieve the rep. Like when you watch Cass do a 1-arm pull down, that dude he's just so strong and he's doing the movement perfectly, but it's almost as if like, the mind muscle connection is an afterthought. It's not something he's thinking about because he knows he's doing it perfectly. And that's how I feel when I'm doing like sets of 5 to 10, is that I'm just, the weight is heavy enough that I have to put in full effort to get the weight to move. When you're doing these kind of 15, 12 like ramp up sets, it's much easier to focus on. For me, it's like doing a pull down, and instead of just moving from here to here with the arm and the elbow, it's my lat is actually depressing through the scapula and the elbow is descending vertically instead of back. There's very subtle things that are happening that I'm able to focus on that I think are also contributing to increasing the pump. And all of that to say that I don't even know if that's a good thing. Like my hunch says it probably doesn't matter. And it's in line with soreness, as Jordan said. And if that speaks to anything, like I'm getting sore in my back where it never would get sore in sets of 5 to 8. So there's something with the fact that it's getting pumped that's leading to more soreness. Is that novelty? Is that because I don't usually work in that rep range? Probably. So if I was put on the spot and I had to say, I still don't think the pump directly creates hypertrophy, but I do think it's a sign, much like soreness, that you're training the muscle you're intending to train. And there's probably value in that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Again, because like you said, you could try to chase it, but then you might not be doing like you might not be the best hypertrophy stimulus, even though you have that pump. So again, like it's good that you have it, and it's probably partly like a hydration or hydration, well fed as well too, because I always find that, yeah, obviously you're hydrated, you're getting in plenty of carbs, like that's obviously going to help promote the pump. And so that probably a good sign that like from a nutrition standpoint and everything, you're in a pretty good spot there. But again, if you chase it or you don't have it, it's not necessary. If you chase it, again, that might not be the greatest from hypertrophy, but also if you don't have it, again, that's not the worst thing in the world. And I like, Jordan, that you talked about the soreness aspect too. I didn't really think of it from that standpoint. It's like, all right, it's not a bad thing, but it's, if you never get it, could we potentially improve like hydration? Could we potentially improve meal timing? Could we improve your training and whatnot there? But yeah, I know there's like a ton of debate on like, oh, the pump doesn't have anything or doesn't do anything. But again, I think it's like more of an indirect thing and not a direct thing there. So cool. I also like that 15, 12, 10. It is nice because you do get a night. Obviously, you're still going to push yourself on that set, but like it is almost like a ramp up and like a warm up set to those heavier sets, which is nice too, versus obviously you should be warming up, but like if you have those kind of harder sets there with that, it'll get you to warm up. I would say and I don't know, Brian, if this is something that you tell people when you're doing that rep range is, so from my understanding of the RIR research is as you get to these higher rep ranges and on the first set, your RIR is off a little bit, right? So that would definitely be something where you do probably feel like you have to push yourself maybe a little bit harder in that first set or two. Does that, do you think that's the case, or what do you?
It's like the rep range feels so high to me that maybe it feels off for the first 5 or 6 reps, but by the time that I get to reps 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, like I'm in it and I don't really know. Like it's not one of my conceptual issues with this rep scheme approach is that per the research, on higher rep sets, you need to be closer to failure, and on lower rep sets, you can be further from failure. But the way that this inherently is designed is like I have you doing, it's like the first set is your warm-up set. So it's 5 RIR for your 15 rep set, and then 3 RIR for your 12 rep set. And then I consider the 10 and the 8 rep sets your work sets because they're like 1 to 2 and 0 to 1 or whatever. When I think about those as just warm-up sets and that they're not volume that I'm worried about, I'm easier. I can wrap my brain around it and accept it more than when I'm like, shit, those sets are useless. So I'd have to not count it as 4 sets of volume. In my brain, I'm still counting it as 2 sets of volume, even though there might be some effective volume in the first 2 sets. I do consider those warm-up sets. And that's in contrast to the way I used to train up literally until a month ago. So the way I've been training forever is that I might do 4 sets of 5 to 8. And only 2 of those are work sets. So it's like the first one is 5 to 8, but it's 10 RIR. And the next one is 5 to 8 and it's 6 RIR. And then I have a 2 and a 1. So either way, I think those first 2 sets, regardless of the approach, are just volume that you're not really counting towards the actual stimulative volume, but they're still sets that are being done that are helping prepare you for the top sets in some way. But there's a ton less volume that's being done if you actually were to count volume by weights, by reps, by load. The volume doing 5 sets or 4 sets of 5 to 8 is way less than doing the 15, 12, 10, 8 approach. So yeah, probably just a different training approach that has value. And I don't necessarily think one's better than the other or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think too, and you pointed this out, I think a lot of times people like would see 4 RIR and think that, oh, it's not like going to be stimulative at all, but there's obviously still some hypertrophy going on. Is it the most effective? Maybe not, but it's still, you're still going to grow at least a little bit from 4 RIR and stuff like that too. I think people like see these studies, oh, you only can grow muscle if you get to 0 or 1 RIR. And obviously that's not the case there with that.
I usually stop that like 15 rep set at the point where I feel like I have the reps slowed down just a teeny bit. Yeah. So if you're reaching that point where you're getting a teeny bit of rep slow on the concentric, then I think you're doing something effective.
Cool. All right, let's go. We'll do one more question here. If you guys are cool with that, we can make this one a little bit quicker, but it's go-to core movements. And then just how do you train core? And again, I feel like core is like a very almost buzzword now at this point, right? What does that mean? I would say just like ab training and stuff like that. What does that typically look like for you guys and whatnot?
Jordan, do you train abs?
No, not unless I'm doing form videos for the app. And I do a couple hard sets of abs and I'm sore for a friggin' month.
Yes.
I'll do some shit I saw Alec Blennis do on his page and I'm sore for a friggin' month. I break core down into quite reductionist, but if I'm looking at it in 4 buckets, I'm thinking of, let's say, a crunch type motion from the top down, a crunch type motion from the bottom up, some sort of rotation of the trunk and some sort of lateral flexion of the trunk. And I'm looking at those 4. And yeah, like if you're like looking at every muscle of the core, we probably need more things than just that. But I tend to look at those 4 buckets and I'm like, hey, if I want to check the big rocks from myself in terms of core, I'm training rectus abdominis, spinal flexion in some sort of a crunch motion and some sort of reverse crunch motion. And then I might do some sort of a cable oblique twist or like a landmine oblique twist for a little bit more rotation. And then something like a side bend or like a body weight side bend and a hip extension, or even a Copenhagen oblique dip or something is the buckets that I would check. So when I'm doing my group programming, like we have optional ab work in there and I'm usually cycling between those 4 buckets, 2 of them within a program. If I tend to train core, I tend to do 2 moves per cycle. I'll do one on one day, one on another day, and I will make sure that I'm not being redundant with those choices, not doing 2 crunch variations when I could be doing a crunch from the top down and bottom up, or something rotation, something lateral flexion. But yes, I'm currently not having a direct core movement in my training right now.
Yeah, I also program from those 4 buckets when I program for others with a bias toward the first 2. So bringing the top down version where you're crunching up, and then also the bottom up version where you're bringing your knees or your legs into your chest. Those are probably my bias. I spend the most time there. And then I throw in a little bit of that rotational and lateral flexion stuff. For my personal ab training, man, I've gone through a lot of iterations of me training abs or not training abs throughout my life. And the most abs I ever did was obviously during CrossFit, because every workout has GHD sit-ups and toes to bar, and I guess those two primarily, but that's a lot of, it basically takes care of the top up and the top down and the bottom up approaches. My abs were probably the best that they've ever been also during CrossFit, for whatever that's worth. A ton of ab volume 4 days a week. Currently, I don't train abs, but when I do, and I would say I probably do them once a month. I program them into my own program and Brian's program twice a week. I usually have a cable crunch and a bottoms up version of a gar hammer crunch, a hanging knee raise, something along those lines. But I usually will have those two ab movements in the program. I usually will end up doing them once a month. And like Jordan said, when he does demo videos, I get really sore from doing 3 sets. My abs are sore for 3 days, and then I don't do them again for another month. And then I feel like, okay, I should probably do abs again. And I do them. One way that I'm recently thought about trying to convince myself to do abs, I just thought of this the other day, is there's all this research coming out about how you want to move after you eat, especially high carbohydrate meals, that it's important to move. It's really hard for me sometimes with the kids around to be like, I'm going to get out and go do a 20-minute walk, or I'm not like going to go on the rower and do like intervals right after I eat. But potentially the 2 ways I've gotten myself to train calves and abs is this idea that, do you guys see that study where they were showing that even doing seated calf raises under your desk after eating lunch acts as glucose disposal? So you're like literally just sitting at your desk at work after lunch, and you're just essentially doing toe lifts with no weight underneath your desk. And if you do those focusing on the contraction, there's something about the soleus that creates this incredible glucose disposal agent and regulates the glucose response or whatever. I'll need to find this and send it to you. But anyway, so with that in mind, I was thinking that I could convince myself to do a set of calf raises after a meal, or go down into the basement and or not even in the basement, I could just do it in my living room, do some leg raises or some sit-ups or something along those lines, some gar hammer crunches. So that's something that literally I just thought about, and I might start instituting as a way to just get myself to do abs and calves.
I don't want to derail this discussion on abs, but I'm going to derail it. You guys see, I'm going to derail it. I saw a post, I'm forgetting where I saw it, but it was like the point of the study was somebody was making a point. Basically, there was a study on creatine and recovery, which it cracks me up because 2024. Can you imagine somebody being like, all right, guys, let's go. We're going to do a study. It's going to be good. But let's learn something. And they're like, all right, what do you want to study? They're like, creatine, muscle recovery. It's like, are you serious? Like, are you serious? But there was a new study. I Googled it. I found it. It's Yamaguchi and colleagues, whatever, 2024. And the title is Effective Creatine Intake on Accelerated Recovery from Exercise-Induced Muscle Damage. No shit. But the person making the post was making the argument that there was in the study, and this could be something for us to talk about another time, but basically even in the placebo group, the group that did not take creatine, there was like significant muscle swelling even after 116 hours, after 7 days. And this was back in that, I don't know if you were like following along with this stuff, Brian, when the 52-week study came out and there was like all this critique of, oh, this is just like crazy muscle swelling. Yeah. And this was a study, these were people like training with like just normal moderate volumes, not 52 weeks. And even after 7 days, there was still statistically significant muscle swelling. And in those 52-week studies, they're usually being like tested 2 or 3 days afterwards. Right. And so that was something interesting that I think I derailed our ab discussion with, but maybe we could talk a little bit about another time. But I just found it hysterical that the person was like, oh, we found this in a creatine study. I'm like, oh, from the 90s? They're like, no, 2024. I'm like, for what?
Are we still studying this?
Yeah, unless you're doing like cognitive benefit or like sleep benefit stuff or whatever. I just Googled it. It was I don't know, people don't like this Dr. Soko guy. Like, people don't like him. But he was the person to point out this point about muscle swelling being like potentially muddying the waters of why people who do a F ton of volume look like they've grown more, which kind of throwing back to our DEXA, even though this wasn't necessarily measured via DEXA. Yeah, I derailed our discussion, but I had a note that I was like, I gotta say this before. I want to see if you guys had seen that or not. I'll send you the post.
Was this the one that Menno posted about, and then he like had it wrong? Like, he had one thing crossed out that was something along the lines of like, he put up a study that was like, creatine offers protection against or with recovery from hypertrophy, but not strength training or something along those lines. And then someone was like, wait a minute, you crossed out the wrong word, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you were, he took it down and reposted it the right way. But
no, this is a different study.
It's funny you bring that one up because
same study.
Okay.
Hold on. This said creatine increases muscle damage from training. I didn't mean, if what I just said was implied that it reduces, that wasn't my implication. That's just the title of the study. But yes. Okay. Yes.
This Actually, I came across this last week at some point on exam, and I saw it, and I just, again, it was like, I saw it, like you said, creatine, and it's just like, all right, we know that. I figured I knew what the findings were going to be on it, like you. But yes, that's super interesting there. And again, I think this just goes to show that, again, with research, we do have to be careful with some of the findings, right? Like you said there, is it muscle swelling? Again, there's just these things that, again, research is helpful, but we can also overlook and maybe take it the wrong way there with that. I don't think you derailed it at all. I think that was awesome. I'm glad you brought it up. Is there anything else you guys want to chat about on this study or anything in general or anything like that? Again, another good episode, ton of great information in here. I guess before I let you guys go, though, do want to let you guys let the audience know where they can find you, and or if you guys have anything coming up on your end that you want to lead the audience to or anything like that.
The gram is a good spot.
Yeah. Instagram is good. All the information's there.
And you guys both have podcasts as well too, so make sure you check those out as well too. Again, appreciate your guys' time, man. This is always fun. I love doing these with you guys, and we'll do it again. And like you said, we already got some topics that we can chat about, and I'm sure there'll be some more interesting studies we can chat about too between now and then. Again, appreciate your guys' time, and we'll chat with you next time.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.